Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into something pretty profound from the source material.
Yeah, this idea that intellectually you can arrive at all is one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there's this immediate question, right? If our thinking, our intellect, can sometimes lead us astray, well, how can we be absolutely sure about that oneness?
That's the core tension. We know you're looking for those quick, deep insights.
And this hits right at that intersection of understanding and certainty.
The text actually lays out three interesting scenarios involving our intellect and how we experience reality, either as separate bits or as a unified whole.
Okay, let's jump into that. The first point seems to be about the limits of the intellect itself.
Right. The source is pretty clear. You can't get absolute, rock-solid certainty just from thinking alone.
Because?
Uh,
Why? Because we make mistakes.
Basically, yeah. The intellect is fallible. We can reason our way to something, but there's always that potential for error in the process. So intellectual conviction isn't quite the same as undeniable truth.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about these three experiences it describes?
Well, the first one is probably the most familiar. If you're only partially using your intellect, not really pushing it.
You see separation, like this chair, that table, me,
Yeah.
distinct things.
Exactly. That's the everyday experience for most of us. An incomplete or maybe just casual use of the intellect reinforces that sense of separateness.
But then the text says if you really engage your intellect,
Yeah.
like fully,
Yeah, push it to its absolute limit, think things through completely.
then you experience unity. How does that work?
It suggests that deep, rigorous intellectual examination reveals the interconnectedness, the lack of fundamental separation. You see that definitions are sort of fluid, that opposites are two sides of the same coin.
Interesting. So incomplete thinking leads to separation, but complete thinking leads to unity.
That's the idea presented, but remember that caveat about fallibility.
Right. Even if your intellect points strongly to unity, there's still that nagging possibility. It's just a very convincing intellectual construct, not the absolute reality.
Precisely. That's where the doubt can creep in if you only rely on thinking.
So the intellect gets us to the idea of oneness, maybe even a strong feeling of it.
But maybe not that unshakable certainty, which leads to the third situation.
Which is?
What happens if you stop using the intellect altogether? Like completely cease its activity?
Okay, wait. So not just thinking less, but stopping it.
That's the proposition, a complete cessation. And the text claims this also leads to experiencing unity.
Why? Because the intellect is what was creating the separation in the first place.
You got it. The intellect is the tool that draws lines, makes distinctions, says this, not that. Take that tool away entirely.
And the underlying unity is just there, what remained.
Exactly. No more division.
Okay, so we have two seemingly opposite paths leading to the same place. Maximum intellectual effort and zero intellectual effort.
Now, the text introduces this concept of someone with a true mind, a perfect intellect.
How do they fit into this? Are they constantly thinking really hard or not at all?
Neither, or maybe both. The idea is they have such mastery over their intellect that they can consciously choose.
Choose whether to use it or not.
And how fully. They can engage their intellect to navigate the world, to create apparent separateness when needed, function day to day.
But internally.
Internally, they remain anchored in that direct experience of unity, the one that doesn't depend on the intellect. They know the underlying oneness even while interacting with apparent multiplicity.
So they have the intellectual understanding and something deeper.
Yes. That certainty comes from the direct experience, the non-intellectual knowing. The intellect becomes a tool they can pick up or put down, but their core reality is that unity.
How does one get there? From just thinking all is one to truly knowing it with that certainty.
The text outlines a kind of progression. First, you use the intellect. You explore the idea, see how all definitions work, understand that only the formless reality is truly essential.
That's the initial intellectual grasp.
Right, but then comes the crucial step, the aspiration to know truth without the intellect.
So actively trying to bypass the thinking mind.
Yes. A deliberate choice to stop using it as the primary mode of perception, to try and see reality directly from a perspective where concepts like something and nothing aren't opposed.
It's like stepping outside the system of thought itself.
And this conscious opposition to the intellect, this move beyond it, is presented as another way to experience that fundamental unity.
And when that happens, when that true unity is experienced, what about the person experiencing it?
According to the text, the individual sense of self, the I that thinks and doubts, along with its intellect, it vanishes.
It disappears completely.
Gone. Dissolved into the unity. And in that state, the text says there's absolute certainty because there's no separate entity left to doubt.
Wow. Okay, so the outcome is the same whether you arrive via the absolute use of intellect.
Or the absolute cessation of intellect.
The experience is the absolute truth. All really is one.
That's the conclusion drawn. And it circles back to explain that partial use by the person with the true mind.
Because if your fundamental reality, your anchor, is in that non-intellectual unity.
Then the intellect itself just becomes, well, less significant. It loses its ultimate authority. It's a useful tool for specific tasks, but it's not the source of truth.
So for you listening, the big takeaway here seems to be this dual path. Intellect can point the way. It can help you explore the concept of all as one.
But that deep, unshakable knowing, that certainty, might actually lie beyond the intellect's reach.
It involves both engaging the mind fully and being willing to transcend it.
Understanding with the mind and then perceiving without it. It's quite a journey described there.
Definitely. So here's something to maybe chew on. Think about any complex idea you grapple with. How might your understanding shift if you first pushed your intellect to its limit exploring it?
And then consciously tried to step back, quiet the analysis, and just perceive it from a different, perhaps non-intellectual space.
Could that open up a different kind of certainty or understanding for you? Something to consider. Thanks for diving deep with us again.